Beautiful. I think that's working. All right. Hello, Caroline. How are you?
Hi, doing good. How are you?
Very well, thank you. And hello to everyone from Sunday afternoon. We're recording this a little bit ahead of time for you all, but lovely for the both of us to get to do this interview and read Caroline's lovely story. So I'm sure many of your devoted fans are obviously very aware who you are, Caroline, but do you want to just give a quick little intro?
Yeah, hi. So I'm Caroline Reid, and I'm a writer. And we were just talking about Matilda and I were just talking about how long ago I actually wrote this story, which it's actually about 10 years old now. And so in that period of time since, I've been actually probably focusing more on writing poetry and performing poetry. So that's my main shtick at the moment.
Mm.
And if I, having said that though, they're quite, I like writing narrative driven poetry or prose poetry. Um,
Mm.
so yeah, gosh,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
That's who I am, and I live in Adelaide. I'm from WA, and I met Bronwyn in Darwin. Yeah,
I've been everywhere, man.
I've been everywhere. Oh no, yeah, just the smaller states and territory.
No, lovely. That's a lovely round trip.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. I know it's always awful having to introduce yourself. Um,
Did I look that awkward? Yeah. Excellent.
no, consummate performer. Yes. And yes, I'm Matilda. I had the pleasure of working with Caroline and editing her debut collection of poetry and prose charade, published by Spineless Wonders and with beautiful illustrations by Bettina Kaiser. So yeah, we're just going to be doing a little interview about this fabulous vintage work of yours, Silver and the Red Box Waltz. And I thought, yeah, maybe we could kick off with getting you to read a little bit of that, Caroline, if
Yeah,
that's all right.
sure.
I've got an
Yeah.
excerpt.
I'll read
Um,
it. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, this is not the beginning. Um, it's a scene with Silver where he arrives late to his sister's for lunch.
mhm.
Lunch was over when you arrived at your sister's. Always the first to speak, she asked the room if 3 o'clock was an appropriate time to serve lunch. You feel it's your God-given right to make people wait? It's only lunch, you mumbled. Your dad stood at the end of the table, jangling coins in his pocket, watching his new bride scrape what was left of the green chicken curry into the bin. She was closer in age to you than your dad. You imagined having sex with her, your new stepmother. That was weird. Well, we didn't wait, your sister announced, holding her glass up high. You thought she was going to make a toast, but she stumbled and pretended not to. Wine sloshed up to the rim of her glass. She never spilt a drop. You thought about your sister having sex with her husband, who was on a business trip in Japan, which made you think about your brother-in-law having sex with a Japanese prostitute, which made you think about you having sex with a Japanese prostitute. This couldn't go on. You knew you had to leave and made your excuse. Too much information, said your sister, pouring herself another glass. Use the toilet in the laundry. You used her posh ensuite instead and jerked off, thinking about your stepmother's ass and the fiddle player's tits. After leaving the mess for your sister to find, you rifled through clothes in the walk-in wardrobe. Payday was a lifetime away, and you were skint. You took 100, but went back for more when you remembered your mother's unbought present. There was a roll of fivers in the undies drawer next to the vibrator with the Queen's head for a knob. You made a mental note to put your sister's name on the card. It was the least you could do. You left without saying goodbye, and when your mobile rang and your sister's name came up, You didn't answer. The text message read, "Pig, you are not my brother." So yeah, that was lunch.
What an excerpt to kick off with. I was wondering which one you'd pick.
Yeah, they don't get along
Fantastic.
so
I
well.
love that scene. So yeah, no, thank you for that and that wonderful performance. I think for context for everyone else, you can listen to Caroline reading the full story on the Spineless Wonders website. But can you maybe talk us through what's the whole story around that, Caroline? How did the let's start with, what was your inspiration for writing this piece?
Okay, so there were a few different things that inspired that piece. There was just a really obvious thing of, a busker, a woman who's a busker in Rundle Mall in Adelaide. And so as you do, you kind of start thinking about what maybe that person's story is. And then, so I think I was struck by, I can't remember her now, but I must have been struck by her at the time. And then there was a guy I know who is fairly young, but has a full head of kind of silver hair. So there's that. And then, I have a theatre background, and so I really love the Spanish playwright and poet Federico Garcia Lorca, and he's inspired a hell of a lot of writers and musicians, including Leonard Cohen. So Leonard Cohen actually has a song called "This Waltz" or "Take This Waltz," and I love that. I love that song. So and it's also, I think, based on a specific Lorca poem, and so it's about that, and it's also about for me, like the redemptive quality of music, and yeah, so all of those things, really.
Yeah, rich soup.
Yeah, and I wanted to try writing in second person point of view as an exercise. I don't really write in second person very much, but it's interesting that a lot of pop songs are written second person. They're always addressing the you, so that's probably a subtle influence as well, having grown up on a diet of like 80s pop in country Western Australia. Has probably got into my brain much more than I care to admit. So it's almost like a pop song.
Yeah. That's interesting though. You mentioned, like, the experimentation with second person, because we had obviously one of Spineless Wonders' fantastic interns, Rachel, has put together some questions, and one thing that she noticed was that there's a bit of a sense of darkness and emotional emptiness in the piece, but as I think we see really strongly from that section, also a lot of comedy. So what was the kind of overarching theme or message that you were hoping to leave readers with here, or even just the feeling and the impression that you wanted to really give people with this piece?
Yeah, look, it's kind of hard to know on a 10-year-old piece, to be honest, but look, I'll make it up. So look, I still think for me that even in the poetry that I'm writing, I'm still regularly writing about the amazing quality of poetry and just, I guess, just arts in general, I think. So I think, look, it's a bit of but Silver is a bit of a character study. It's a bit of a character study, and for me, kind of sexuality and just comedy, I think is really sort of a fun combination. he's pretty kind of sad dude. Like, he's just getting things all wrong, you know.
Mm.
And I do know that I think some readers have interpreted the darkness and the emptiness in it. But I think that's also the richness of his life, like the fucked upness of his life as well, is what makes it kind of unique too, you know. I mean, I love that when the boys are going to Bali and he doesn't have enough money to go, but he goes to the airport and gets pissed with them, and then they all pile on a plane and he goes out into town, and all that money he stole, he fucking pisses it up that night, you know. Just like, I mean, it is what it is, isn't it? Like,
Yeah.
there's a certain like grabbing life by the horns in doing that.
Yeah.
Well, like, it's not what you're supposed to do, but and there's always like the downside of the hangover and shit. You don't end up getting the present and all of that kind of stuff. But there's a real kind of like, I don't know, disregard for the niceties of life as well, even turning up to work without showering and all that kind of stuff. Like, it's gross, but it's just like a big kind of, you know, up yours as well. So,
Yeah.
you know.
No, but I really agree with what you're saying about it being quite a kind of like I'd call it almost like a tactile story, and that idea of grabbing life by the horns. Like there's a lot of sensuality in this story for me. Like, not all of it, like you're saying, nice. Like, the unshowered element is pretty revolting, and even you know, later on in the story, like the mother's blistered lips and all that sort of stuff. But I really love how that kind of stands as a counterpoint to some other, what I found were like quite kind of endearingly like childish, kind of vulnerable images of like when he first sees the fiddle player, and I think there's the line of like he wanted to kiss the top of her boobs, like just,
Yeah.
I felt like he could have been like 35 or 15, and that just kind of, I just want something soft.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, just something to bury my nose into, like, and just, yeah, exactly, be in this sort of soft place for a while, you know.
Yeah.
Getting
That
lollies
really,
off Santa, you know, like, that's
yeah.
very childish kind of as well. So I'm glad
Yeah.
you saw him as endearing as well as all that stuff, because I think, you know, there is that element of a lost boy to him. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. And so obviously, I know from Sharad, working on Sharad with you, that this isn't the first like male character you've written, but do you find that that's a perspective that you write from often, or like what's the appeal of writing from that perspective for you?
Well, I really like men. um,
Happens to the best of us.
it happens to the best of us, you know, and it was a long time before I think started developing meaningful female relationships in my life. And I think that for a number of reasons, but again, when you grow up in like a mining town, it's very blokey, you know, and probably listened to a lot of that. And again, like, they're not always that PC these days, but I still take a lot of pleasure in the way that there's such a kind of freedom in the way that language is used, or that that they take up space, or, you know, I kind of like that, and maybe it's something that I want in myself. I don't know, and I probably have taken on some of those kinds of qualities, but more and more I think that as people that we you know, have a, like, the whole kind of gendered role thing, you know. I just think that in some ways trans people are the most honest people, I think, because I've been thinking about this a lot recently, because there's a lot of trans people in the poetry scene, And I think in lots of ways they're the most honest about who we are as people, because we all have male and female and other. We really do. And them, they is probably the most accurate description of all of us, you know. So sometimes I really like exploring that kind of more, I guess, masculine side, perceived masculine side. But as you say, sometimes these boys that can go and jerk off in their sister's bathroom to annoy the fuck out of her also just want to sink their faces, you know, into something soft and kind of be loved. I mean, that's simplifying it. But yeah, I don't know. I find it intriguing. Something, I guess, intriguing too. That's something that I think I know, which is kind of masculinity, but there's so much to know. Can I explore that a bit in writing, I guess?
Yeah, and it's interesting. Like I think that point about you know, gender and gender roles and how we see the boundaries, you know, between one, the other, all that sort of stuff. And obviously the much needed recognition that it's a spectrum, not, you know, two boxes that are available.
Yeah.
I think that's an interesting point, you know, particularly in terms of considering how the reader responds to some of the more like you know, R-rated content in this story. Because I think, like for me at least, as I was reading this, it wasn't immediately clear to me if the narrator was, well, I mean, like, first of all, it's in second person. So when you say you, I think, oh yeah, me, you know. So I think navigating the way that you as a reader respond to what gender identity you kind of place on the character or the character that you're being asked to inhabit, and how that changes your perspective or your reaction to, yeah, particularly the more like kind of graphic elements of the story, I found really interesting. And yeah, and I think again, maybe like the fact that this is like a young man's perspective, but written by a woman, I think that's an interesting element as well in terms of, yeah, I think for me, just like that vulnerability that we see in this character was like really struck home for me. And I just wonder if that's a theme that would have come through as strongly if it wasn't written from your perspective. I don't know, I'm not saying it's impossible, but I think, yeah, like again, that really resonated.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I didn't think of that. And I always love that people that read your work just see stuff in it that you don't necessarily, you know, that wasn't your intention. But certainly, I think that there is, you know, there's so much bravado in men, and I do, you know, I do find that. Like, I have a brother who works still works in the mining industry, and you know, he's on the inside, no question, he's much more fragile than I am, but he doesn't. You know, just that emotion, his emotional life, he's much more fragile. But on the outside, he has to be this, that, the other, you know, and particularly when you're working in that kind of blokey environment, you know, and so much kind of anger as well, because you can't express it and all that kind of stuff. So I think I think it's important to treat every character that you're writing about with some kind of sensitivity, you know.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I'm glad that he comes across as a bit vulnerable, because he is, you know, because he is, and there are a lot of men that I know that are, and that are confused, you know, that are so confused. So yeah, hopefully, but I think he does find something in the music. So the ending for me is almost like a baptism, like going into the sea. Again, it's a visceral thing where he he can actually feel himself, because, you know, going into water like that, you know, it changes how your body feels. And so it's almost another extreme thing that he's doing so he can feel, you know.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, from your perspective, is it a happy ending?
Oh, it is for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, because again, it's like, it's that thing of and this is maybe where, as a writer, I don't, you know, I perhaps didn't have the skill to um pull that off at the end, where I maybe I you know, I don't mind the ambiguity of people reading into it, what they read into it, but
Mm,
perhaps if I'd been more skilled as a writer, I could have been more obvious about that being a positive thing, a kind of, you know, a rebirthing kind of thing, even if that rebirthing was only for that night, and then tomorrow
mm.
he goes back to his usual. But it's like being
Yeah.
this gift of music in this box, which is
Yeah.
magical in itself, and that triggering, you know, him almost dancing into the ocean, you know, fully clothed.
Mm.
Again, it's like, why not?
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah. No, and sorry, I suppose that's more what I mean is like I feel like, you know, it does end on a very kind of like euphoric note almost. But I think again, just for me, the thing that I think the thing that made that all the more poignant is like in my head there was that question of like, what, so does he go back to IKEA the next day? Like is this all just like rinse and repeat afterwards? That yeah, but I think like it's really beautiful the way it ends, and you're kind of just suspended in that moment of, you know, the sea and the music. Like, yeah. So, like you're saying, the character, like the reader, just kind of gets to enjoy that moment for what it is.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. And I do imagine him, yeah, just, you know, the following day, nothing much probably changes, or maybe
Mm.
it does, you know.
You'll have to write us a sequel.
Yeah, sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
cool.
Well, on that note, so you've mentioned that this piece is one of your older ones. So let's maybe just talk a little bit as well about your writing in between now and then. Obviously, I've worked with you on Sharad, your debut collection. How did you find that experience in terms of, you know, publishing and editing a collection, in terms of like, what do you feel like that you know, kind of taught you, or like confirmed for you about how your writing practice and, you know, your craft has kind of evolved over the years? Because again, that collection obviously had some more recent pieces as well as some old classics.
Yeah,
So
yeah. Yeah, that's right. So there was some older pieces in that as well, which
mm,
was mostly the prose, I think.
mm,
Uh, Such a good question. I'm not very good at kind of seeing my own work. Um,
mm.
uh, yeah. I don't know. Yeah.
Well, one of the things that jumps out to me, even as you're saying that, is that like the prose ones are the older pieces, and you've moved, like you were saying, more into poetry and performance lately. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah,
Or
that's a fair, yeah. So
with,
that's a fair assessment. And
what's underpinning that, do you think?
what's that?
What's underpinning that, do you think? Doing more
Um,
poetry.
I don't know why particularly it's kind of evolved that way. I've got, you know, I kind of grew up much more interested in music than writing, and that also involved kind of performing in local
Mm,
shows and things like that. And then in my 20s, I did an arts degree in theatre and writing, and sort of worked in theatre for a lot. I did a bit of performance, but it was mostly writing for theatre. And then kind of maybe it's a bit about what you think you should do. And so theatre was, I started not enjoying it very much when I went up to Darwin, actually. I kind of realized, I thought I'm going to just put that away for a while. And so I didn't do much writing while I was in Darwin, but it was where I started writing prose. I thought I want to know how to write prose. So I started writing prose, still kind of writing a little bit of poetry. And then I was working on a novel. And I
What's that face for?
again, it's like, because I'm not very good at it, and it's taking me a long time. Like, that's been put aside. So it's almost like I'm trying everything. And then when I was doing a draft at the Essay Writers Centre, every day I was kind of seeing this poster for the Australian Poetry Slam heats coming up. And a few years prior, a friend had kind of talked me into doing a bit of a guest spot at one of those events. But then it took me a few years to actually compete in the events. And I did, and that was 2016. And I made it to the state final. And for the next 4 years, I made it to the state final and twice performing at the Opera House. So it was something that I really enjoyed, much more than any other kind of writing that I'd done. And it seemed to, particularly spoken word poetry, it seemed to combine the elements of theatre and writing, that and also kind of musicality, because some of it is, some of the stuff that I write is rhyming, is quite metrical. So it, you know, in my late 40s, early 50s, it seems that it's all sort of coming together in that way. And also I think that maybe the short form is something that I'm more interested in. And is writing a novel something that I feel I should do, because that's what's regarded as kind of like serious work.
Yeah.
And, you know, even the spoken word scene, I think, in the literary world is seen as not as serious or professional as printed poems. And maybe I do have a bit of silver in me that just sort of goes, well, fuck you, I'm going to do this stuff that I enjoy.
Yeah.
Not fuck you, but you know what I mean. So it's kind of like, oh, actually, if I'm being really honest with myself, what do I really enjoy? And it's, at the moment, it's the kind of performative poetry stuff. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think, I wonder if there's something in the like embodied experience of like literature in that sense that is part of it. Because I mean, obviously, I know exactly what you're talking about, and I agree that there's this ridiculous kind of division between high literature that has to be, presumably very difficult to write and to read, and of course can only be absorbed as a written work. But yeah, maybe there is something quite freeing and so more enjoyable about being able to perform something where you have this great story, but it's also like the experience of performing it and kind of sharing that story with your audience. That's quite different and quite energizing, maybe.
Yeah, it is quite energizing. But it's been the same, like even the process of working with yourself and working with Bettina, one of the things that I learned about that too is that I really enjoy collaborating. I was really sad when that process came to an end, because it was such an enjoyable process, and it's almost like I've got to an age where I'm letting myself do the things that I find really enjoyable, rather than doing the things that I think I should be doing. So collaboration is fantastic. Working in new mediums is fantastic. So I've been recording Sharada's audio and I've been sending that to sound engineer in Sydney, and he started sending me back some stuff. And again, that collaborative thing and working in this new medium and learning how to use GarageBand and all that sort of stuff. I'm really, really loving it. And so I think up until this point, perhaps I've had a really restricted view about what writing is. And I think writing for me is one part of the creative process. I'm just as interested in all of this other stuff as well. And that's okay. You know, it's perfectly okay to be like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think you've already touched on this, but maybe to round out this little interview, what advice would you give to someone who is writing, or maybe in particular, like trying to work their way back into enjoying writing at this point in time? What would your advice be?
Oh, yeah.
$64,000 question.
Question. Well, look, you know, I haven't been writing that much. I've been focusing on recording the audio, and I've been writing a little bit. I've been helping other people to write. I've been teaching a bit. I've been reading more. So that's kind of what I've been doing. But now that I've nearly recorded all of the audio, you know, I was journaling this morning, just kind of thinking, I feel like it's time to get back into some meaty writing and think about what is next. You know, it's been quite hard, I think, to write while I've still got charade in my brain, and I'm still effectively working on that, but in a different medium. And I'm not a great multitasker. I get overwhelmed. So to put pressure on myself to write new material while I'm actually still working on the old stuff, I've just gone, nah, you're not the kind of person that can do that. So I just maybe cut yourself some slack. And if you're trying to write and you're not enjoying it, then don't bloody write, you know. Maybe it's okay not to write, or enjoy writing your shopping list, or, you know. The other thing I'm doing is starting to learn Welsh. I knew a little bit of Welsh. My mum.
Fantastic.
So I'm learning that, and that is kind of like, for me at the moment, it's a time of learning new things, and and I'm just trusting that all of that, when I do start writing again and kind of going, what's next, that somehow all of that will feed in. You know, you've got to trust that process. And it's taken me years to learn that. So do something else if you don't want to write, but make sure you enjoy it.
Yeah. No, that's a lovely bit of advice.
Don't you think, Matilda? What do you think?
Oh, I do think so. And I think, I mean, I totally agree that there's this, I personally feel a lot of pressure sometimes that, you know, I should be writing, or if I am writing, that I should be loving it rather than just kind of glaring at my screen thinking, oh, this is fucking hard. And that you're somehow discounted from being a proper writer if it is hard, or if it is, you know, uninspiring some of the time. So I think, that's a really nice sentiment, to cut yourself some slack. If it's not working one day, you know, do something else with your brain, and, you know, it'll all start bubbling away in the background with any luck.
Yeah, I think so. And also, like, I try to remember that piece of advice, that you can't write and edit at the same time, which effectively means you can't, you know, it's not a good idea to write and judge your writing as you're writing it. And if there's that voice in your head that's saying this is shit, you have to somehow ignore that voice and just keep writing anyway. And later is when you edit, and we all know that we're going to write crap when we're first just getting it down. And, you know, again, like, but don't try to edit. Don't let that editor's voice come in when you're just doing the writing, you know. And I give that advice because it's something I'm constantly having to tell myself.
Yes, think we could all do with that little voice in the back of our heads. Write drunk, edit sober is how I heard someone put it.
Yeah.
I don't know who said that.
That's right. So writing drunk for me doesn't work either. So.
Yeah, no, I've tried it.
It's terrible. That's the opposite. That's when you go, yeah, this is so great. I'm so great. I'm such a good writer. And you go, oh dear. Yeah.
Good for 20 minutes.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you so much for that. I'm conscious of timing, so maybe we'll start wrapping things up now. But were there any other words of wisdom or things that you wanted to say before we pass over to question time?
No, I think that feels pretty good. That feels like a good amount of time as well, hey? So shall we say goodbye? Hey? I think so.
Thank you so much for such a lovely interview, Caroline. Great to get to talk to you again. And of course, everyone head over to the Sharad website. Sorry, Bronwyn. The Spineless Wonders website.
That's right. I don't even have a copy of it. And silver is from this one, 2011. I think it might have been the first. Bronwyn can clarify that. Yeah.
Cool. Yes. Somebody jump on the Facebook questions and answer that for us.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you. Okay. All right. Thanks, Matilda. So great to chat with you.
Yeah, you too.
See you again.
All right. Yeah, talk to you soon.
Bye.